Tucker Carlson hosted Chairman Omali Yeshitela from the African People's Socialist Party from the Uhuru movement, which is currently facing Russiagate charges, basically. They are basically being charged with colluding with Russia in local races that they ran in St. Louis, Missouri, and I believe one candidate was in Florida as well. I'd have to fact check that, so don't quote me on that. But here is Tucker Carlson, who, ironically, one of his final broadcasts before he was fired at Fox News was not interviewing Chairman Yeshitela, but mentioning that the Biden DOJ was going after them. So he didn't interview him on Fox. I don't think they'd have allowed for that, which is part of why some people speculated that he was let go just because he was going places like that. Here he is actually bringing the chairman himself on the program. So we're going to take a look at this.
The chairman of this group, the man now accused of being a Russian agent and about to go on trial, we're honored to have him join us now. Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me. This is an important interview for us. It helps us to break out of this encirclement, information encirclement that has been imposed on us by the U.S. government. And when we talk about the ignorance of the people being a factor here, part of the way to keep the people ignorant is to keep them from participating in discussion.
Yes.
Because the attack on my right to speak is also an attack on the right of the people to hear. So I have something to say. People may, as you said, agree or not agree with it, but at least they can have opinions that are informed opinions about agreeing or not agreeing with me. But when they use grenades and battering rams and armored vehicles and assault weapons and things like that to keep me from talking, and when they talk about...
What he's talking about there is the raid on their offices. They actually raided their offices, and they actually put tape over the cameras when they got into the offices so that the cameras couldn't see what they were doing or what they were taking out of there. That's what he's talking about there.
Putting me in prison for 15 years, which is the equivalent of a life sentence for me. This is designed to keep the people from hearing what I have to say. And it's a real testimony, in my opinion, of the fragility of a social system that cannot tolerate a discussion coming from somebody from one of the most economically depressed sector of the city of St. Louis. So it's all a falsification. I wanted to say, first of all, that our lawyers, for the purpose of making this defense, had to move forward and say that even if we did what they said we did, that the First Amendment protects us. But I want to say beyond that, that they fabricated most of what they say, that they're lying. It's mostly a fabrication, and that they are politically motivated in doing what they have done because of internal crisis and crisis in the existing global system that sees forces like China and Russia, and increasingly even countries like Iran, countries like Venezuela are challenging the hegemony of a country that has held that for the longest period of time, has been the big hegemon. And so I think this is a domestic crisis that's represented by what we see happening inside this country right now, and what we see being partially responsible for it by forces around the world who are challenging the ability of the United States to continue to be the big dog here. I think that's what we're looking at. And then, of course, there's the immediate personal interests of a guy who's running for president, re-election, and who is also attempting to escape the moniker of being sleepy. So, I mean, I think these are some of the factors that informs much of what's happening right now.
This is being done by the...
So before we get to this part, just the very setup of the conversation. Imagine this happening on Fox News. Fox News would never have allowed for this interview to happen. This is part of the reason why we said you're only making Tucker more relevant by kicking him off Fox News, because now he's going to be able to do things just like this, interviewing Vladimir Putin. They wouldn't have let him do that on Fox News either, right? But the very setup of this conversation, the attack on the right to speech is also the attack on the right of people to hear, right? And obviously Tucker went to Russia. Tucker has become interested in the prospect of this multipolar world, and now you get to hear from a black socialist, an African socialist, who is under attack from his own government. It's just a crazy thing to see. I was shocked when I saw on X, oh, he interviewed Omali Yeshitela. I knew he covered it. It's one thing to cover it for 5 minutes, but to actually have him on for 40 minutes.
Well,
and look,
didn't he-
Tucker's not the first guy to do it. Obviously, our friends at RBN have interviewed him, but this is a huge platform. It's a huge microphone to give this guy. And as we'll see in the next piece of video that we're going to show, not only do you expose people to the idea that these conversations are fine and good to have and important to have, but some of the substance they get into is stuff that you hardly hear anywhere else.
Well, and just seeing Tucker Carlson interview him really calls out the people who haven't. I mean, we haven't, but we don't think we could get him. Maybe I mean, at this point, we probably could.
We probably could by now, yeah.
At the time that broke, it was before we kind of blew up. But all these people who claim that they're the real left. I mean, you got one station, what's their slogan? The home of progressives, TYT. They could have gotten it. No doubt about it. Majority Report, these people who all want to talk about how they're the real left and other people in the space are apostates. They're big enough. They definitely could have gotten this guy. They didn't bring him on. These are the same people, and I call them out because they're the same people who will clutch their pearls at Tucker Carlson interviewing Vladimir Putin.
Right.
But hey, he's actually doing fucking journalism. He's doing your job. Do you think Tucker Carlson agrees with the ideology of this group? No, but that shouldn't enter into it if you're a journalist. So, yeah, I mean, Tucker Carlson, ideologically, it's hard to say exactly where he is at this point. He seems to be on a journey, but as a journalist, he's standing out head and shoulders above anybody else of his visibility and stature.
Yeah, and now we're going to get into talk of a more specific issue. Tucker broaches this topic by saying, hey, Democrats are the Black Lives Matter party. Why are they going after you this way? Why haven't you got much support from Democratic Party circles?
Factors that informs much of what's happening right now.
This is being done by the administration that tells us constantly how much they love and worship black people. They love black people. No one's ever done more for black people than the Biden administration. And no one has cheered that on more loudly than the New York Times and the Washington Post, which also love black people, probably a lot more than you do. So have they come to your defense at all? Like any of these?
Not at all.
Yeah, why? That's kind of weird.
No, and it's a real serious kind of contradiction that this is able to occur. And especially, we talk about Biden, if we just take it on a personal level, which is not necessarily where I was intending to go, but if you take it just on a personal level, we're talking about Biden, who claims to be the great liberal, white man who loves us. We're talking also about the guy who was opposed to the Civil Rights Bill, talking about the guy who was opposed to busing because he didn't want his children to have to go to school in a jungle, et cetera, just on a personal level. And but here, they have never had to offer African people anything. When they run for office, it's not because they're offering us anything. They're frightening black people. They say, if you don't vote for us, you're going to get Trump, who is a demon, or you're going to get the Republicans, who are demons, or you're going to get what we characterize as fascism, et cetera. So they don't have to promise black people anything, except they swear they'll protect us from the other white people. That's one aspect of it. And then there's a whole body of folk who are employed through things like welfare, slavery, and programs that they create it's a whole array of folk that employ liberals based on that. And what we stand for is self-determination. We also believe in reparation, but the point is that we have in St. Louis alone, we have in 7 contiguous blocks in St. Louis, economically depressed sector, we purchased something like 20 some odd properties, and we put businesses and other kinds of things there. That's not permissible. We are supposed to get in line for welfare or something like that. And we are teaching African people that you can be self-determining. There is an alternative to what you got. But the whole Democratic Party apparatus rests upon this foundation of welfare slavery, and this is where they would have black people located. And so the Democratic Party, you can't say that they lied to us, whether it was Obama or whether it was this guy. Biden, you can't say they lied to us because they didn't promise us anything, except they would protect us from Trump, from the Republican Party.
Okay, so that's an amazing piece of video, and that's, you would certainly never see that on Fox News. You would see a critique of the welfare state from a black conservative, like we were talking about Candace Owens earlier, right? But here you have an African socialist critiquing the welfare state from the left, saying, no, we want self-determination. Right. We don't need a welfare state. And this is foundational to left-wing economic thinking. And this is something that, when I heard that, I was really excited that Tucker did the interview, because now a lot of conservatives are going to get to hear that side of the argument. Because if you only consume right-wing media, you think socialism equals a nanny state. Right? Communism, leftism equals a nanny state. Economic leftism is not about a welfare state. Economic leftism is all about the empowerment of workers. The empowerment of workers. That's why the logo is a hammer and sickle. It's not a remote control and a couch. Like the whole point of it is empowering workers, collective ownership of workers. It's centered around labor. Now, a lot of right-wing thinkers who are against the welfare state say, well, the solution to welfare is to go get a job at a meatpacking warehouse for $16 an hour, work yourself to death, and never get anywhere. He's coming from a different place. There is the socialist critique of nanny state welfare programs. And the alternative to that is to empower workers, right? To actually encourage labor by making labor worthwhile, by giving workers a piece of the action, right? Rewarding them the fruits of their labor that are rightfully theirs. That's the whole point. And that's an argument you will never hear. They would not in a million years platform that point of view on Fox News. That pierces their whole narrative. That deflates their entire narrative, right? In right-wing circles, welfare and socialism are one and the same, when really they're not one and the same. And so to hear him make that point is super important, especially on a platform like that, on a show like that, where a lot of people who that would never have occurred to in a million years will get to hear that for the first time. And hopefully think about it a little bit.
Well, that is coming out of a stronger, more self-reliant philosophy of leftism that has unfortunately been buried and supplanted by the legacy of the new left, as we were discussing with Tusker last week over on Rumble. We've had on the show in the past discussions about the idea of personal responsibility and gotten pushback from some people who consider themselves on the left. That sounds like a right-wing talking point. Well, maybe that's part of the fucking problem. Maybe that's part of why they're eating your lunch. If you think personal responsibility and individual initiative and hardiness and toughness, if you attribute those as right-wing qualities, well, guess what qualities you need to win a fight? You're not going to win a fight with this philosophy of needing a state to make everything right in your life or to fill all your needs. That is a distortion of what leftism at its best is. And if you hear serious people like Uhuru talking, they reject that.
Right. And that is sort of what that is. Now, a state as a collection of people taking collective ownership of not only places of labor, but of the fruits of that labor. Right. Well, that's the state meaning a different thing. The way he is describing a state, he describes a state as basically a bureaucratic make-work program for who? White liberals. That's what he said. Right. He says these welfare systems exist to give liberals jobs. They exist to make jobs for liberals. Right. And so in that sense, and that is what a state is under neoliberalism, right? Which is why to reimagine that into an actual collective where everyone chips in. It's not that some people chip in and some people sit back and take off the system. No, an actual left requires collective effort. That's the whole point of it. That's the entire point of it. That requires a total reimagining of the system, and that reimagining of the system does not happen in mainstream forums, whether it's CNN.com or the pages of the New York Times, right? You cannot broaden the conversation to even get to a point where you view economic leftism in that way, because under the current paradigm, yes, leftism does mean welfare under neoliberalism, right? If you're operating under this system, that is what passes for the left. But obviously, what you heard in that conversation was a redefining of the terms, because you have to rearrange society in a very fundamental way. This is why the technocratic, Liz Warren, who's the woman with the chalkboard who doesn't have a job anymore because she lost, Katie Porter. Yeah, that's why that isn't good enough, because people see that and they see what Omali himself rejects there. Well, now you're talking about a bureaucratic nanny state that entraps people at the bottom. Now, does capitalism liberate people at the bottom? Well, obviously not. Obviously not. And that's the line of bullshit that the right tries to sell. But the answer to that is what Omali said there, which is, no, you need self-determination, and self-determination can be achieved through socialism. Self-determination is not unique to capitalism. In fact, in this end stage of capitalism, self-determination has become almost impossible. That's why you can't afford a house anymore, right? That's why no one can afford to buy a home, right? Because Vanguard bought up all the homes.
Yeah, well,
right?
I was just going to say the hedge funds are buying up the houses.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's only going to continue. If you look at the welfare state, that was created to keep the system from changing, right? You have this restive underclass that in the 60s was rioting and burning down the city. So what do? You give them money to shut them up. That's not a threat to the system, especially in a rich country, right? You can afford to give them that. And if anything, and this is where I say I am sympathetic to these arguments, you usually only hear them coming from people who are considered on the right, like Candace Owens or Thomas Sowell. But here you see a left version of that argument. And it's not an accident that you don't hear that argument from the left, right? If it comes from the right, then liberals can dismiss it. But this argument that it is a way of pacifying and really undermining a population to just hand them money, and it doesn't really give them the opportunity. So where do you go from there?
Well, it's not just.
What's next after you give out the money? Like, how do they get out of that circumstance?
Well, the other reason also why you hear more of that critique from the right is because the right's answer to the welfare state is, well, go out and get a job at a meatpacking plant. That'll never. So that doesn't threaten.
It's not a threatening.
That doesn't threaten the system either.
That's what I'm saying. It's not an accident. They'll let you hear it there. Well, and also I think it's easier for them to attack it. It's easier for them to dismiss it. Say, oh, that's just crazy talk that this money is being used just to pacify that population so they don't make too much trouble. It's not actually there to help anybody.
Sure, but the right is eager to platform that because the solution doesn't solve anything either.
Sure.
Please clap.